So, what's going on guys, Kids here and welcome back to a brand new video. For today I'll show you the top 3 new best builds in New World Season 3. So there is a new meta, and that's why for each and every single build I will explain what attributes, weapon masteries and even weapon and gear perks you want to have. Then what gems and specific gear you want to use to get out your stats as much damage as possible. Then as well I will show you the best gameplay of me using different weapons, so you would know which abilities you want to use first on your enemies and much more. So if all this sounds interesting to you, then let's get right into it. So then moving over to the first build, which is the one and only Greatsword and Hatchet, and these are the attributes you want to have. So no matter from which level you start using this build, you first of all want to get your dexterity and strength both to 100, and then get 50 points in constitution, and then continue putting everything else in dexterity and strength, and then around level 60 and 625 items core gear, you should have around 150 strength, 150 dexterity and 150 constitution. And lastly, for your gear you want to go with the heavy category, and this of course means using every single heavy equipment. So then taking a closer look at the first weapon, which is the Greatsword, and these are the weapon masteries you want to have. So first things first, you want to select this one perk, and then unlock the first ability called the Relentless Rush, and then get these two next perks. Then from here, let's move over to the other side and unlock both these two abilities, called the Calamity Counter and Roaring Rupture. And then lastly get these 5 perks, and that's it. Now from this point and onwards, you're free to pick and choose which perks you want to unlock next. So then moving over to the second weapon, which is the Hatchet, and these are the weapon masteries you want to have. So first of all you want to unlock the Berserk ability with these 2 perks. Then afterwards let's move over to the other side and unlock the second ability called the Rendering Throw, and then get these 2 perks. And then lastly unlock the last third ability called the Infected Throw, and then get these 3 perks, and that's it. Now again from this point you're free to choose in whichever order you want to spend your points. Okay, so now let's move over to the gameplay, where I will show you the best way to play this build. And for the first weapon we have the Greatsword, and your first Q ability is called the Relentless Rush, which will dash through your enemies while spinning and applying at 20% slow for the next 4 seconds. Then for the second ability we have the Roaring Rupture, which when you use it, it will stab the ground and create a shockwave that will do a bunch of AoE damage, and you will get a Fortify effect for the next 5 seconds. And in PvE, if you want to be a tank, then after using the skill, you will aggro all the mobs on you. And then lastly we have the third skill called the Calamity Counter, which will give you a block for 2 seconds. And depending on how many times the enemy continues to attack you, the more counter damage you will be able to do after the 2-second block expires. And then for the second weapon we have the Hatchet, and your first Q ability is called the Berserk, which after activating you will enter the Berserk mode, which will give you speed, self-healing and attack damage increase. So this skill is amazing just to use in open world to catch players or run away from them, and it's amazing as well just to activate and then spam the basic attacks for super high damage. Then for the second ability we have the Rendering Throw, which will throw a hatchet that does damage and reduces the enemy's damage absorption for 10%. And then lastly we have the Infected Throw, which will make your character leap in the air and throw another hatchet that will deal damage and inflict the enemy with disease, which will make your target weaker for 10% for the next 10 seconds. Okay, so then let's move over to the rotation, and no matter if you're farming mobs in PvE or doing PvP, the same principle and rules apply. So at the beginning of the fight we want to start with the Greatsword, and first we'll use the Relentless Rush, then dodge once, then use one heavy attack, then activate the Roaring Rupture, then now again dodge once, and then now we want to use about 3 more heavy attacks, and then lastly we use the Calamity Counter before the Defiant Stance ends from the Roaring Rupture, and that's it. The idea behind Greatsword is for every 3 attacks we want to dodge once, and then we want to activate these skills in this exact order, because this will activate the Step and Strike perk, which will give us Empower and Stamina. And then when all of the effects have run out on the Greatsword, then now we want to switch to the Hatchet and activate the Berserk mode. Then use 3 light attacks, then use the Infected Throw, then use 3 more light attacks, then use the Rendering Throw, and then we finish it off with the 3 more light attacks. And now from this point we repeat the same rotation all over again. And specifically for PvP, the skill rotation might be different depending on what the enemy does, but similar principles apply. So at the start you want to attack with the Greatsword heavy attacks, Relentless Rush and Roaring Rupture, then switch to the Berserk to activate the Berserk mode, and then keep spamming normal light attacks with the rest of your skills. And then lastly, if you ever get in trouble or need more defensives, then switch back to the Greatsword and use the Calamity counter, and that's it. So now for my last and final conclusions for this build. This Greatsword and Hatchet weapon combination right now is one of the best builds in New World. This build will give you high tankiness while at the same time give you a massive amount of damage. So then last but not the least, for the Greatsword and Hatchet, you want to use the Opal gem. And then for all of your gear, use 3 Malachites and 2 Onyx gems. And then lastly, on your character, you want to equip the Heart Rune of the Detonate. And then on top of all this, to find out the best weapon and gear perks, watch this video, which is titled Which Weapon and Gear Perks Are the Best for Your Build. You can find the link in this video's description or just scroll through my channel. And in that video I will specifically explain how perks work and which ones are the best for your gear and weapons and much more. So in a quick summary, if you're looking to do high damage or you just want to use one of the best Greatsword builds, then for sure try this one out and have fun. So then moving over to the second build, which is the Flail and Warhammer. And these are the attributes you want to have. So first things first, if you start from level 0, you want to get your focus to 100 and 200 in Constitution. And then continue putting everything else in focus and Constitution. And then around max level and max gear item score, you should have around 100 strength, 150 focus, and 350 Constitution. And then lastly, for your gear, you want to go with the heavy category, and this of course means using every single heavy equipment with a tower shield. So then taking a closer look at the first weapon, which is the Flail, and these are the weapon masteries you want to have. And if you want to unlock these perks and skills in the same most efficient way, then just follow these numbers on the screen. So then moving over to the second weapon, which is the Warhammer, and these are the weapon masteries you want to have. So same thing again, if you want to unlock these perks and skills in the most efficient way, then just follow these numbers on the screen. But mostly this is up to you, as long as you unlock all the same skills and perks. Okay, so now let's go over to the gameplay, where I will show you the best way to play this build. So for the first weapon we have the Flail, and your first Q ability is called the Arcane Smite. This skill will make your character leap forwards and strike the ground, which will do damage in 2.7 meter range, while behind ourselves leaving a hazardous area that will do damage for 6 seconds, and weaken the enemy for additional 10%. Then the second skill is called the Arcane Eruption, which will create an eruption in front of our character, dealing damage to enemies, and inflicting 2 stacks of impairment for 6 seconds. And then lastly we have the Warding Bludgeon, which will perform a spinning leap. This will do damage, and while you're leaping, you will get a reinforced fortification, which will increase your armor for the next 8 seconds. And then for the second weapon we have the Warhammer, and your first Q spell is called the Shockwave, which will slam your hammer into the ground, causing a 3-meter earthquake that deals damage and staggers and roots enemies in front of you for 2 seconds. Then the second skill is called the Path of Destiny, which will create this powerful ground strike that deals a lot of damage in the AoE range. And then lastly we have the Wrecking Ball. This skill will strike the ground with your Warhammer, dealing damage and at the same time knocking down your enemies. Okay, so then let's move over to the rotation. And no matter if you're farming mobs in PvE or doing PvP, the same principle and rules apply. So then at the beginning of the fight we want to start with using the Arcane Smite and Arcane Eruption, which will debuff the enemy and do damage. So then we use the Warding Bludgeon, and then right away we switch to our second weapon, the Warhammer. And then from here we keep using the Shockwave, and then right after the rest of the 2 skills. The main idea behind this playstyle is to do a lot of damage, but first of all dealing damage and debuffing the enemy with the Flail, and then switch to the Warhammer for even more damage, or just general stunts, which will be very useful for group PvP or general PvE like expeditions and etc. So now for my last and final conclusions. This Flail and Warhammer weapon combination is one of the new tank builds for this meta. This setup will give you insane armor and just general tankiness, while at the same time giving you the option to do damage and hold aggro in PvE content, or on the other hand annoy the enemy in PvP content. This Flail tank build works great for both PvE and PvP, so in my opinion having a very versatile build works perfect for those players who don't want to farm 20 different gear sets and weapons just to play a build for different events. So overall this build is a jack of all trades. And then for the Flail and Warhammer, you want to use the Cruel Gem for PvP and the Carnelian Gem for PvE. And then for all of your gear, use all Enix Gems for PvP or Abyssal Gems for PvE. And then on your character, you want to equip the Stalwart, Heart Rune of Stone form. And then finally for consumables and perks, those are your personal preference. I personally for tanks would recommend to collect armor with perks that will improve your health, armor and different resistances, depending on what type of content you are doing. But of course, depending on what you want to do, this will be different for every player. So in a quick summary, if you're looking for the new meta Flail tank build, then for sure try this one out and have fun. And then for the last and final build, we have the Ice and Void Gauntlet. And then these are the attributes you want to have. So first things first, if you start from level 0, you want to get your intelligence to 150 and then start building your constitution. And around level 60 you should have 300 intelligence and 150 constitution. And lastly for your gear, you want to go with the medium category. And the best gear setup is to have heavy helmet, heavy chest armor, medium gloves, light pants and medium boots. And this will give you 22.9 kilogram weight, which is exactly just below the heavy weight category. So then moving over to the first weapon, which is the Void Gauntlet. And then these are the weapon masteries you want to have. So first of all you want to unlock both these two perks and then get the first ability called the Oblivion and then get these two perks. Then afterwards unlock the second ability called the Petrifying Scream and then get these two perks. And now let's move over to the other side and unlock the last third ability called the Orb of Decay and then get these three perks, and that's it. Now from this moment you can unlock all the other perks in whatever way you like. Okay, so now let's move over to the second weapon, which is the Ice Gauntlet, and these are the weapon masteries you want to have. So first of all you want to unlock the first ability called the Ice Spikes and then get these three perks. Then afterwards unlock the second ability called the Ice Storm and then get these three perks. Then from here let's move over to the other side and unlock this one perk and then the last third ability called the Ice Shower and then get this one last perk, and that's it. Now again from this moment you can spend your points in whatever order you want. Okay, so now let's go over to the gameplay where I'll show you the best way to play this build. So first of all for the Void Gauntlet we have the first Q spell called the Oblivion, which creates a circle around you and your teammates inside the circle will be getting 20% damage increase. But on the other hand, your enemy standing in the circle will be taking void damage every second. And a really nice thing to do is while standing in the circle, do bunch of medium jumps, and because of the perks we have selected, we will be getting plus 15 stamina each jump. So this will give us the ability to dodge more enemy attacks and gain more stamina at the same time. I found this feature very useful in 1v1s to escape enemy attacks or in PvE, where the mobs couldn't catch me and much more. So then for the second ability we have a Petrifying Scream, which when using will unleash a Void Scream, and this will stagger and root enemies in front of you. And then lastly we have a third ability, which is called the Orb of Decay, and you can fire this orb which can go through your targets, and each enemy that it hits it will deal decent damage and reduce their damage absorption, and then later that orb will come back and heal you for a few seconds. And lastly, if you hold the right mouse button you can regain more mana, but in exchange your health will go down. I would only recommend to use this mechanic if you really are at full health and your mana potions are on cooldown, so then use it for a second or two and then you should be good to go. But as for a non-healer build, you should use this mechanic super carefully. So then for the second weapon we have the Ice Gauntlet, and your Q spell is called the Ice Storm, which all enemies standing in it will get damaged and slowed, and the more enemies you hit the higher damage you will get. Then the R ability is called the Ice Shower, which when using will create an ice wall, and if players go through it it will stun them, and this ability is very useful in chapping your targets. And then lastly our third ability is called the Ice Spikes, which when activating creates this trail of spikes in a straight line, which deals damage in AoE range, and if the target is below 30% health, a lot of times you can one-shot him. And the way it works that if you're too close to the enemy when you're using the ability, the ice spikes won't explode with the highest damage to the enemy. So what you want to do is when using the spell and you see that the player is 1 second away from getting hit, then press the right mouse button and this will detonate the spike, which will deal very high damage. So as far as your ability combinations go for the Ice Gauntlet when farming mobs or even players, the best spell combination to do is place the Ice Storm aka the Q ability on grouped up enemies, and if you see that enemy is stunned then use the Ice Spike ability and do bunch of damage. Or another way to set up your Ice Spike ability is to run into the enemy and place the Ice Shower spell, and if the enemy touches the ice wall he will get stunned, so then you can use the Ice Spikes and it it will be easier to hit the enemy. The thing that you need to understand about the ice spike ability is that the trail of spikes is actually pretty small line, so especially in PvP, it is pretty hard to hit moving targets. So most of the time I usually use it when I see that I can hit 100% multiple players or just a single stunned player. And then of course for the void gauntlet you want to hit the enemy with the petrifying scream, and then right after place the oblivion spell, and while dodging keep on hitting the enemy. Then when both of these abilities get on cooldown, use the orb of decay, and then after that switch to the ice gauntlet or keep on using the void gauntlet, depending on which weapon deals more damage, and that's about it. So now for my last and final conclusions for this build. This void gauntlet and ice gauntlet weapon combination is very high damage, and you have a lot of abilities to put together, and it works very well in PvP and as well PvE. So then for the gem choice for the void gauntlet you want to use the opal gem, then for the ice gauntlet get the malachite gem, and then for all of your gear, rings, amulets and everything else, use the Enix gems. And then on top of all this, like I explained in the first build, to find out the best weapon and gear perks, watch this video, which is titled which weapon and gear perks are the best for your build. You can find the link in this video's description or scroll through my channel, and in that video I will specifically explain how perks work and which ones are the best. So in a quick summary, if you're looking for the best solo mage build, then this is the one for you, so enjoy!